Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. We have been bouncing all around the courts all over the country here in a March Madness week. Clearly, the National Football League work in the beginning of the free agency period as well. And then there's baseball and the White House and the Astros on Monday. Eddie Matz, our man on the scene for all things ESPN and the worldwide leader. He's been bouncing all over from the Gulf Coast and spring training to being down at the Parkland situation with Rizzo and how baseball has been impacted in all this. And we're not even to opening day yet, Eddie, and they're opening on March 29th. Eddie Matz joins us now for all things Major League Baseball. Been a tumultuous time since you and I got together when the Astros were celebrating, right, Eddie?
Yeah. Simultaneously, you would think with the free agency situation the way it's been was actually not tumultuous, but it's been exactly the opposite of that, right?
Well, kind of hot and bothered this week where Jake Arrieta gets $75 million from the Phillies, sort of unlikely suitors, and Moustakas crawling back on his hands and knees and costing himself money, and obviously Boris being in the middle of all of this, right?
Yeah, I remember back to winter meetings in early December, and we all stood there and listened to Boris do his annual State of the Boris, and he comes up with these crazy metaphors and talks about how Moustakas, Arrieta, they're $200 million guys. And, at the time, you think, all right, maybe they're not $200 million guys, but you thought they might not be far from that. And here we are, like you said, with these guys basically come crawling on their knees. Not that, $75 million for Arrieta is nothing to sneeze at, but I can't imagine that this is how Boris envisioned the offseason playing out for him and his clients. Crazy.
Well, and then there's the case of the Orioles, which is where we are. So, let's start the conversation there. You were in Sarasota a couple days ago. The Machado move to shortstop, all the offseason, thoughts that everyone's going into a walk year. Mr. Angelos appears to have evaporated at some point, gone into the Willy Wonka factory, never to be heard from again. And Brady Anderson might be running the place. Duquette's supposedly running the place. Buck's got, 6 months left on his deal. Machado, Jones, Brock, Britton, who's hurt. It is quite its own little soap opera here. I don't know how they're going to win 90 games here, Eddie, or pretend that they're going to do that.
Yeah, and I don't know that anyone, certainly not anyone I've talked to, including me, because I do talk to myself, I don't think anyone has any delusions that they're going to win 90 games. I think the Cashner signing helps them. He's not like a sexy arm, but he's going to give us, I don't think he's like a 200-inning guy, but he's not going to strike out a bunch of guys, but I think he gives you some stability. They could still use more, and, remains to be seen. Maybe they do get a little more. But, no, 90 wins to me is pipe dreaming. I do think it's been interesting that Machado is, granted, it's only spring training, but, from what I saw, and it seems like he is fully engaged and mashing down there, which, again, spring training, but if you look at his spring trainings in the past, he was something like a 230 hitter lifetime in spring training, and he gets out of the gate hitting like 600 this year. All the guys I talked to in that clubhouse were like, yeah, man, he's locked in. Not from a standpoint of like a locked-in mid-season form, but like mentally fully engaged. I think the Orioles narrative is, well, this is a greater challenge for him, so we want him to be fully engaged. But I think, my take is they want him there because it makes him more marketable if they need to trade him in the summer. And, of course, he wants to be there because it makes him more marketable when he's in this position a year from now doing the free agent thing.
This is fascinating, whether he's going to go out and hit 321 this year with 48 bombs and become that guy that everyone will be salivating. Because let's be honest, Eddie, you and I had some conversations back when the summer got kind of heated, and he was Mendozing, before the All-Star break into June, and then, caught fire at the end, and I think we all know what he's capable of, but where is that switch in the on and the off? And clearly in a walk year for him, for Harper, for a lot of these guys, there's a lot of money to be made out there, that even in this market that's been weird for Moustakas and some of these other guys, this would be their chance to go cash in. So it is a little bit of a bet on them or against them, but in the case of the Orioles, there's no hope at all that he's coming back here and playing baseball. And that unto itself in 2018 is quite the bummer here on a civic level, I think.
Yeah, but I kind of think at this point, I feel like there's been so much talk about it, there's been so much lead up to it, and maybe I'm skewed because I'm in the business. Maybe the everyday fan doesn't feel this way, but I feel like people have got to be ready for it by now. I feel like maybe, a year or two ago, people had some anticipation that maybe they would get him to a long-term extension. But by this point, I feel like there's just been so much talked about and written about that it's like, all right, that's what's going to happen. And if you're a Baltimore fan, sure, it's a huge bummer. But I think we understand in today's marketplace, it's hard. It's really challenging to lock up any marquee name. But then you look at a guy like Machado, who, like Bryce Harper, they're both so young and they both have so much potential in terms of their ceiling. They're still, such young guys. It's even for like a fiscally normal franchise, it would be hard to get that done. And I wouldn't necessarily accuse the Orioles of being fiscally normal. So, yeah, I can't imagine any way that he's coming back.
He is Eddie Matz. He's at ESPN and the Worldwide Leader. You can follow him there as well as on Twitter at ESPN Eddie Matz. All of our WNST programming brought to you by our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. Get in there for the coffee. Make sure you're downloading that Rofo app. You're using that app. It's going to save you. Get some free coffee. You're going to get some free Western fries as well as some of that tasty chicken that I'm going to be eating this weekend as I gear up for March Madness. Stop by and see them. Also brought to you by our friends at Cole Roofing. We all felt the March winds blowing in here last week. If you've got a commercial roofing space, you might want to get somebody up there just to take a look around after that sort of a windstorm. Make sure you don't have any damage. My friends at Cole Roofing are happy to help you with that. You can find them out at coleroofing.com. Eddie Matz, our guest. You can find him down in Florida, anywhere spring training has sprung. And look, the Phillies in Arrieta, that's an interesting play. I think Lance Lynn, for the amount of money he got, and one of the great bargains that if he's going to come in and make 33 starts of the caliber that he's made them, that he's clearly trying to pitch his way into getting another contract as well now that he's on the other side of 30. But there were some guys out there that could sort of turn things around. I don't know that it turns the Phillies around this year, but it certainly turns around the perspective that they're willing to spend that kind of a money that in that kind of a number that we're serious about getting involved here.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think people viewed them, and I was one of those people, as kind of just biding their time. They've got a lot of young talent, but I think they were kind of saving up and waiting to splurge maybe on a Harper or a Machado next offseason, and then they go get Arrieta. And not that I think he's getting 30 this year, 25 next year, and 20 in the third year. Not that precludes them from doing that, but it kind of goes against what you thought they were doing. But I got to tell you, even before the Arrieta signing, I was kind of high on the Phillies. Like, I still think the Nationals are clearly the team to beat in that division. But the Phillies have a ton of young talent, and on the position player standpoint, guys like J.P. Crawford, Nick Williams, Aaron Altherr, like guys that if they continue to do what they've showed in small doses, and then you combine them with a guy like Carlos Santana, Rhys Hoskins, like they can really have an interesting lineup. I think the question mark becomes the pitching staff. But again, they've got a lot of young guys with a lot of potential. Jared Eichhoff, Aaron Nola, Vince Velasquez, but it was hard to kind of put them in that category of legit wild card possibility. But then they go get Arrieta, and all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, like I'm starting to think, as a guy who covers the Nationals daily, I've been writing this forever, that like the Nationals are already in the postseason, but then the Arrieta deal happens, and you're like, whoa, maybe not so fast.
It's funny, you go down there to the west coast of Florida, and I was at the NFL Combine 2 weeks ago, and, the season kind of kicks off for the NFL, and every coach and executive's in the room, and there's such positivity for whatever you're working on that somehow, some way, you can be the team that wins 10 or 11 games like Jacksonville or even the Philadelphia Eagles this year, the Rams, these teams that make these big moves. Man, you were on a trail this past week where you're going from Phillies, where they don't really believe, Blue Jays, where they can't believe, the Orioles don't believe, the Pirates. I mean, all of these places where this time a year or two ago, you went and there really was some blooming optimism and thoughts about we can be that team that's going to win 98 games, get in and make some noise and help ourselves in July around the trading deadline. And we got young kids that are going to sprout and all that stuff. And it's funny how quickly it can go from hopeful to hopeless to some degree, especially amongst the fan bases, because baseball right now, and with this Red Sox-Yankees thing and the Dodgers gearing up and the Angels spending money again, they're starting to become a little bit of divide here by who's going to spend and who's not going to spend, and the tanking word that we heard so much in the offseason. They don't want to call it tanking, but when you're not trying and when you're not willing to go spend 12 or 14 million bucks on a legitimate frontline pitcher that you can plug in there every fifth day that would change the whole complexion of your team, the Yankees and the Red Sox and the Dodgers and the Angels, these teams didn't have any problem going all in the offseason.
Yeah, and your point is well taken about the fans maybe not necessarily having that hope springs eternal mentality like they've had in springs past. But I got to tell you, talking to guys in clubhouses on my little tour that I just did, these guys are competitors. They're alpha males. They're professional athletes for a reason. There's not a single, well, I'm not going to say there's not a single clubhouse, but there are very few clubhouses where the players in the clubhouses think that they're hopeless. It's not like, as fans, it's easy for us to write them off and look at the Yankees and the Red Sox and the Cubs and the Dodgers. But the guys in the clubhouse, they compete. It's what they do. They have lots of testosterone. They want to win. And these guys actually, they may be delusional, but they think they can win, regardless of what the situation is. They don't, until scoreboard and standings say otherwise, they think they're still in it. I was talking to Chris Davis last week about Machado, and I was asking him, is the fact that Machado's raking in spring training a coincidence? Or is it, does it have to do with the fact that he's, engaged in, what's going on there? I said, is this about like him seeing, value and the Orioles wanting to increase his value for a trade? And he was like, whoa, dude, pump the brakes. Like, if we get to August 1 or, July 31 and we're in a position where we are out of it and we need to make a deal, yeah, then we have that conversation. But until then, there's nothing to talk about because there's a lot of time between now and then. And so I really do think the players don't necessarily buy into the whole tanking thing the way that fans do.
Well, you certainly can see whether your team is spending money or making an effort, and certainly in the case of the Phillies, let's just take the Arrieta thing for them as a come on, and maybe they could deal him out into a pennant race at some point, down the line and get something back for him, so that becomes not such a bad investment. But at the end of the offseason, they can say to a Machado or they can say to a Bryce Harper, whomever, hey, we're serious, we were spending money, we're involved in this. I don't know that anybody in the Orioles organization right now really knows. I've had 3 people inside the organization send me text in the last 90 days asking me if I understood what was going on. And there really is no explanation for any of this, right? It's almost like there's nobody home. There's nobody managing the kingdom right now.
Yeah, it's eerie, and I've heard similar things. People that I know have talked about not just the organization, but, in Angelos' other life with his law firm. I've heard, similar things are going on there. So it is eerily odd. I don't think you get anyone inside the clubhouse to admit that. But no, for sure, especially with a guy, Alex Cobb still out there, right? Like Lynn signed, a guy like Alex Cobb is out there. Who knows what the price is? But for the money that these other guys are signing for, Lynn was 1 year, $12 million. You got to think Cobb certainly isn't going to be much different than that on an average annual value basis. And, for the Orioles, that sounds like a lot of money because that's like Ubaldo money, and that didn't work out well. Alex Cobb's not Ubaldo. But, with a guy like that still out there, and you're looking at the back end of your rotation, like 4 and 5 still aren't solidified, makes you scratch your head. It's interesting, though. You mentioned Arrieta and the Phillies potentially dealing him down the line if need be. That contract that he signed, which is essentially 3 years, $75 million, it ends up becoming almost exactly what Justin Verlander's contract was at the time the Astros traded for him, right? He had, I think, a little bit left of last year. Now he's got 2 years at $56 million left, which is almost exactly what Arrieta would have. So I could see the Phillies making that case, right? It's like it's the perfect pitch. Hey, look, Verlander, no one wanted to take that contract, but the Astros took it. Tigers helped him out a little bit with the money. But it makes it easy to say, hey, look, this is what a guy like that did for the Astros. Arrieta could do the same for you.
He is ESPN Eddie Matz out on Twitter covering all things Seams and baseball down in the spring training Grapefruit League and moving around down there and seeing the Braves and the Twins and other places where there's various signs of hope. Give me a little background on the Parkland situation in Rizzo and your involvement because, I mean, I want to get off the field and get on to real life here. Before this whole thing even got going with spring training, Florida had this incredible tragedy. A famous baseball player, a decorated guy, was a graduate there, an alum, has gotten very involved, as many people I've gotten involved in using my advocacy here for the protection of our children. But you were down there and a part of that as a journalist, as someone, I've never been involved in any sort of a tragedy like that to come in from the outside, and certainly on the baseball side of that, I know that was a very poignant thing for you to be a part of as well.
Yeah, and let me start by saying, as tangentially involved as I was, I obviously, compared to the people that actually went through this, completely different ballgame. But my experience was interesting. I got down for my first spring training trip on February 13th, which I think was a Tuesday, and I was at Nationals/Astros camp in West Palm, which is the closest camp to Parkland. It's about 40 miles north of there. So on Wednesday afternoon, I got a call from my boss saying, "Hey, you're being reassigned." And I was like, "What? What are you talking about?"
Wow.
And she said, "Yeah, we need you to go down to Parkland to cover the baseball angle of that." ESPN had quite a few people coming in for different angles, and I was going down there to sort of cover Rizzo's involvement in that. What was interesting was I didn't think I was going to get emotionally wrapped up in it. I knew what had happened, but I kind of had my head up my butt a little bit because I was in baseball mode and a little bit buried at spring training.
Yeah, you're just covering a story, and then you show up and you're like, oh, my God, right? Like,
yeah.
Literally, right?
So I got down there. The visual was on Wednesday at like 6 o'clock, and I got down there at like 5 o'clock Wednesday afternoon, and I'm watching everybody come in. The football team is walking hand in hand up to this thing, and thousands of people. And then they finally start the ceremony, and a couple politicians spoke, but the first civilian who got up and spoke at the thing was the father of one of these kids who lost their lives, and he was a guy who was about my age, mid-40s, Jewish guy like me, lost a ninth grader. I have a ninth grader, and I was like, this could have been me, and all of a sudden, I went from watching these people around me with tears streaming down their cheeks to myself. I just started bawling. I was like, oh my goodness. It was just surreal. And again, I didn't go through this. I was just there to observe and report, but I was just overcome with the emotion of the whole thing, which is crazy. And then later on in the ceremony, in the vigil, Anthony Rizzo came up and speak, and I thought he only spoke for like 3 or 4 minutes, but it was really, his words were, I thought, very impactful. I don't know whether he wrote it or if he had some help writing it, but I thought what he had to say was fantastic. And what I really liked was that he didn't want anything to do with any of the media that was there, whether it was me from a sports outlet or, ABC News or whomever. He said, I don't want anything to do with that. I'm just here to help. I don't want the focus to be on me. And so from my perspective as a journalist, I was hoping to get some time with him after the vigil, but so I was kind of disappointed on that level. But personally, I was actually really pleased that he made that choice because I thought it was the right thing.
He is Eddie Matz. You can follow him out on Twitter for all these stories as well as all things camping down there in the spring training. So, I mean, is it the Yankees world? I mean, make a case for 3 or 4 teams here that you're keeping an eye on that are legitimate World Series contenders. I mean, I still look at the Cleveland Indians and say, that door is going to get kicked in at some point because I do believe in what they've done there. But certainly the level of competition, and with everybody I've talked to in the offseason, Nationals, Red Sox, and Yankees, all very capable of winning a championship last year, have all changed managers. I mean, there's a whole different thing going on in a lot of places.
Yeah, and you didn't even mention the Astros. I
Sure.
think, there was a whole flap about Chris Russo from MLB Network was talking about how, the Yankees are the team to beat. And then Justin Verlander publicly took exception to that. And he's pretty active on Twitter, so he tweeted something out about basically saying it goes through us. And then first day of spring training, we were actually talking to him, and he reiterated that. He said it goes through here. as much as the World Series jinx is a thing and no one's repeated in over 15 years, it's hard for me to come up with a legitimate reason why the Astros aren't going to repeat, because they were really good last year. They missed some of their bigger-name pitchers for extended time, Keuchel, McCullers. They only had Verlander for a month. They get him for a full year now. They didn't have Correa for almost 2 months because he was injured. To me, by the way, they get Garrett Cole, who gives them 3 opening day starters from last year. They got a couple bullpen pieces, Joe Smith, who's very underrated, Hector Rondon. So it's hard to look at the Astros for me and say they're not going to get back there. I think the Nationals, for me, I think the Nationals are my pick to go to the World Series and probably face the Astros, but that Astros team is pretty stacked on paper.
Eddie, always a pleasure to visit with you, man. We've got no hope here in Baltimore, right? I mean, anything you want to say to the Oriole fans here about where Tom Petty once said the waiting is the hardest part? I don't even know what we're waiting on at this point, but I know opening day is coming soon, and this is going to be quite the drama over the next 12 months, I think, here as to who's really going to be running this place when it's all over with.
Yeah, well, I think there is. I think you can take, if you're an Orioles fan, you can take solace in this, which is that, when they made the playoffs in 12 and 14, when they've done their things in the past, they weren't expected to do it. They surprised. The people did some things they weren't supposed to do, and I don't know that the preseason outlook this year is much different from what it was in those years. You could argue that pitching-wise, they had some more legitimate pieces, like some veteran pieces, like a Wei-Yin Chen and things like that, than they do now. But it's completely within the realm of possibility that they could do the same thing that they've done in these last few years, where they surprise people, they hang in there just long enough to win 86, 87 games and get a wild card. I don't think it's going to happen, but there are a lot of us who didn't think it was going to happen in the past, and it happened. So you never know. Yeah,
I just think there's an advanced version of the Red Sox and Yankees this year, a better version of those franchises than what we've seen here recently. That's all.
Yeah, no question. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't agree with you. But, you were asking, is there anything to give Orioles fans hope? I think the history and the precedent, if you're looking for slivers of hope, that is it. And I'm not an Orioles apologist. I am as realist and cynicist as they get. And I don't think they will win more than like 72 or 3 games. But, they've bucked expectations in the past, so it's conceivable.
They got a lot of guys playing for contracts, which I'm sure makes Mr. Angelos, think they're all very motivated to some degree. Eddie, always a pleasure, man. We'll keep up with you and see you sometime between opening day and the All-Star game. And the All-Star game down in D.C. this year, so I think I'm finally going to take my wife and get that off her bucket list so she can go to an All-Star game and we get to sleep in our own bed. But that is the goal, at least. So we do have a local All-Star game this year.
Yeah, and I'll be there too, much to my wife's dismay, because usually All-Star Game, I am not supposed to be there, and so we take our nice anniversary trip while the kids are in sleepaway camp. But this time, I will actually be at the All-Star Game, so no trip at that time.
Well, you would have done all right if you would have gone to like the San Diego one or whatever. Miami didn't stink, although they played it in a bubble, but we went down there last year for that mess. So, hey, my man, safe travels to you. Great reporting out there on the Rizzo stuff and all the other work you're doing right now. We'll see you on opening day, pal.
All right, Nestor, take care.
Eddie Matz joins us here. He is ESPN Eddie Matz out on Twitter as well as at the Worldwide Leader, covering all things, not cactus, but grapefruit, but there's plenty of cactus out there to be had as well. We will be at the NFL owners meetings 2 weeks from now down in Orlando as we try to figure out what the 15-yard pass interference is going on, and Jerry Jones getting along with Roger Goodell, and what's a catch and what's not a catch. So plenty of things to be discussed down at the owners' meetings 2 weeks from now, and I'll be getting down there in just a time for spring training to get up here, opening day on the 29th. We're going to have head coach Barry Trotz of the Washington Capitals joining us for a swabbing for the Bone Marrow Registry and for There Goes My Hero on that evening. That's Thursday the 29th. Make sure you're circling that on your calendar. We'll be telling you more about that as we get ready for Caps postseason and rocking of the red in April. March Madness in full swing this week. All of our interviews up in the buyatoyota.com audio vault for your listening pleasure. You can access that anytime, anywhere. Download the TuneIn Radio app, becoming crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.